We need to move. Now. The words cut through the roar like a knife through fabric. In the space of a heartbeat, the fluorescent-lit hallway goes dark. Glass explodes, somewhere behind them. And the sound is something no one who heard it will ever forget. But just minutes before, this was an ordinary Sunday evening. A graduation cap sitting on a kitchen counter, a shopping cart rolling across a Home Depot parking lot, the green glow of a radar screen in an operations center, a street sign on Rangeline Road, still standing, still readable, still marking the way home. May 22nd, 2011. Joplin, Missouri. In less than 1 hour, this city of 50,000 would face America's deadliest single tornado in modern record. 158 people would not survive the night. More than 1,000 would be injured. An entire community would be transformed by 38 minutes of violence that rewrote the understanding of what tornadoes can do to American cities. This is the inside story of an EF5. Sunday, May 22nd, began the way Sundays do in southwest Missouri. Church services filled the morning. Families gathered for lunch at the usual places. The afternoon stretched out, warm and humid. The kind of weather that makes you think about summer, coming on fast. For the Joplin High School class of 2011, this was supposed to be the day. Graduation was scheduled for that afternoon at the high school. Seniors wore their caps and gowns. Parents adjusted cameras. The ceremony went off without a hitch, though the air felt heavy, electric, in that way that locals recognize but rarely worry about. By late afternoon, people were doing what people do. Shopping at Walmart and Home Depot, grabbing dinner at restaurants along Rangeline Road, heading home after weekend errands. Will Norton, 18 years old, newly graduated, was riding with friends in an SUV, probably talking about what comes next, the way you do when you're 18, and the whole world feels like it's opening up. At St. John's Regional Medical Center, the ER was staffed for a normal Sunday evening. Nurses worked their rotations. Patients rested in rooms on the upper floors. Backup generators sat ready in the basement, like they always did, tested and maintained, but rarely called upon. Nobody was looking at the sky yet, not really, but the atmosphere was building something. To understand what happened in Joplin, you have to understand what feeds a supercell. It's not magic, it's physics, brutal and elegant. Warm, moist air was streaming north from the Gulf of Mexico. At the same time, cooler, drier air was pushing in aloft. That creates instability, the fuel. But fuel alone doesn't make a tornado. You need rotation. You need wind shear, winds changing speed and direction with height. You need all the pieces to click together at exactly the wrong time. By mid-afternoon, the Storm Prediction Center had highlighted the region. Not a guarantee, but a raised alert. The ingredients were there. Supercells were possible. Tornadoes were possible. Strong tornadoes were possible. A tornado watch means conditions are favorable. A tornado warning means a tornado has been detected or is imminent. That distinction matters. It saves lives. But only if people understand it. Only if they act. And that's where things get complicated. The sirens in Joplin sounded earlier that evening. Not for the tornado that would hit the city, but for storms nearby, moving through Jasper County. Keith Stammer, Joplin's emergency manager, was watching the situation unfold from the Emergency Operations Center. He and his team were coordinating with the National Weather Service in Springfield, tracking multiple cells. When the first warnings came through, the sirens activated. People took cover. The storms moved on. Then, the sirens sounded. Again. Outdoor warning sirens are designed for exactly that, to alert people who are outside. They're not meant to wake you from sleep. They're not a countdown clock. And when you hear them more than once in an evening, something happens psychologically. Some people think false alarm. Some think they're just being cautious. Some simply tune it out. One Joplin resident would later describe it this way: "We'd heard them already today. You start to wonder if they really mean it this time." It's called siren fatigue. It's real. It's dangerous, because this time, they meant it. West of Joplin, a supercell was intensifying. Storm spotters were reporting rotation, not a funnel cloud, not debris. Rotation, the kind that makes trained eyes go cold. C.J. Huff, superintendent of Joplin's schools, was monitoring the situation. Graduation was over, but his responsibilities weren't. Schools become shelters in disasters. Schools are where parents bring kids when the world falls apart. He was watching the radar. He was on the phone. He was waiting. At 5:34 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a tornado warning for Jasper County. The language was clear. A tornado was on the ground, west of Joplin, moving east. The sirens activated again. On the Weather Service radar, the signature was textbook: a hook, echo, strong rotation, and it was headed directly toward the city. The tornado crossed into the populated areas of Joplin at approximately 5:41 p.m. It was already violent. It was already massive. And it was about to carve a path, 3/4 of a mile wide, through the heart of a city. The turn had happened. There was no going back now. The EF5 tornado that hit Joplin, Missouri, on May 22, 2011, was approximately 1 mile wide at its maximum. Think about that for a moment. A mile. Not a football field, not a few blocks. A mile of spinning, 200-mile-per-hour wind scraping across a densely populated city. It entered Joplin from the west, chewing through neighborhoods, block by block. The path length would eventually be measured at over 20 miles. The duration, roughly 38 minutes. But for the people directly in its path, time stopped meaning anything. The first homes hit were pulverized, not damaged. Pulverized. Foundations swept clean. Vehicles thrown hundreds of feet. Trees debarked and snapped at ground level. This is what EF5 damage looks like. This is what winds over 200 miles per hour, due to the places people call home. The sound is what people remember most. Not like a freight train. That's too simple. Like 1,000 freight trains, like the earth itself, tearing apart. A roar so loud and so low, it vibrates in your chest, in your bones, in parts of you that don't have names. Joplin High School, where hundreds of families had gathered just hours before, took a direct hit. The building that had been full of celebration, of future and possibility, was reduced to rubble in seconds. Classrooms where students had learned, auditoriums where they'd performed, gyms where they'd competed, all of it gone. The graduation caps, the photos on the walls, the trophies in the cases, scattered across a debris field that would stretch for miles. One family, driving home from the ceremony, saw the sky turn green and then black. They pulled into a ditch. They covered their heads. They prayed. When it was over, they looked up to find their car, sitting in a field, 200 yards from the road. The windows were gone. The roof was gone. But they were alive. In the neighborhoods around 20th Street, near Cunningham Park, entire blocks ceased to exist. Not destroyed. Ceased to exist. Where houses had stood, There were now empty lots, with only concrete paths remaining. Personal belongings, pieces of lives, were distributed across the landscape like confetti. A transformer exploded somewhere in the darkness, then another, and another. Blue-white flashes, lighting up the churning black core of the tornado. The power grid was dying, one section at a time. At St. John's Regional Medical Center, the staff had minutes of warning. Minutes to move patients away from windows. Minutes to activate disaster protocols. Minutes to do the impossible. The hospital took a direct hit. Windows exploded inward, showering hallways with glass. The roof began to peel away, in sections. Water poured in from ruptured pipes. Emergency generators kicked on, then flickered, then failed in sections. Alarms screamed from every direction. And in the middle of it all, nurses and doctors and respiratory therapists moved patients by hand, by flashlight, by feel, in the darkness. One ER nurse would later describe guiding non-ambulatory patients down a pitch-black stairwell, water up to her ankles, the building shaking like it was coming apart, because it was coming apart. She said it was like performing surgery on a ship in a storm. Hospitals are built to withstand disasters. They have redundant systems, backup power, evacuation plans, drilled dozens of times. But this was beyond the plan. This was a Category 5 tornado hitting a working hospital, full of vulnerable patients who couldn't just get up and run. Staff shielded patients with their own bodies. They formed human chains. They carried. They lifted. They stayed. By the time the tornado passed, the hospital was no longer functional. Hundreds of patients would need to be transferred to facilities in surrounding cities. But they got them out. They got them all out. Range Line Road is Joplin's main commercial artery. Box stores, restaurants, gas stations. On a Sunday evening in May, it was busy. The tornado crossed Range Line at full intensity. A Home Depot, packed with shoppers, was shredded. A Walmart supercenter collapsed, trapping dozens inside. Vehicles in parking lots were picked up and thrown like toys. Semi-trucks were rolled and stacked. Gas pumps were ripped from their moorings. Inside the Walmart, the lights went out. The roof came down. People who had been shopping for garden supplies or groceries seconds before were now trapped under twisted metal and concrete. In the darkness, voices called out. People dug with their hands. Strangers formed chains to pass debris backward. Someone found a crowbar. Someone else found a pry bar. They started cutting people out. This is where you see what humans do when systems fail. There were no police yet, no fire department, no ambulances. Just people, pulling people from rubble with whatever tools they could find. Ad hoc rescue crews forming in real time. One man, whose name was never widely reported, organized a group to systematically search the wreckage, calling out, listening, marking where they'd searched, prioritizing the sounds of children. He was a plumber. He had a toolbox in his truck. That toolbox saved lives. There are stories from that night that sit heavier than others, stories that remind you how fragile the ordinary really is. Will Norton was 18 years old. He'd just graduated that afternoon. He was riding in an SUV with friends when the tornado hit. The vehicle was picked up and thrown. Will was pulled from the car by the wind. His friends survived. Will did not. He was found later in a debris field, far from where the vehicle had been. He was one of 158. A respiratory therapist at St. John's stayed at her post, keeping patients breathing manually when the power failed. She worked by flashlight and by memory, counting compressions, timing breaths, doing what her training had drilled into her 1,000 times. She worked until help arrived. She worked until her arms gave out. Then, she worked some more. A father shielded his 2 daughters in a bathtub as the walls around them disintegrated. He covered them with his body. He held on. When it was over, the bathtub was sitting in an open field. The house was gone. The father had a fractured spine, but his daughters walked away. These are the unthinkable moments. The seconds where everything you thought was solid turns out to be air. Where the only thing between life and death is luck, or physics, or the decision someone made to take cover 30 seconds earlier. The tornado moved east out of Joplin at approximately 6:19 p.m. 38 minutes, 22 miles, 158 lives. And then, silence. The 911 system was overwhelmed within seconds. Landlines were down. Cell towers were down. Dispatchers fielded hundreds of calls simultaneously, trying to triage by sound alone. Screaming, crying, background noise of wreckage, shifting, voices asking for help that couldn't come fast enough. The first responders who could respond were already in the impact zone. Off-duty firefighters ran toward the sound. Nurses who'd been at home arrived at what was left of the hospital, still in their street clothes. Police officers worked without radios, without coordination, just moving toward whoever was calling out. But most of the first rescues didn't come from professionals. They came from neighbors. People with chainsaws emerged from basements and started cutting through fallen trees to reach trapped families. Volunteers with pry bars worked methodically through collapsed structures, calling out, listening, moving debris piece by piece. Someone set up a triage station in a parking lot, using car headlights for illumination. Someone else started directing traffic with a flashlight and hand signals because the intersections were dark and clogged with wreckage. This is what the first hour looked like. Chaos, organized by ordinary people doing extraordinary things, because there was no other choice. Keith Stammer's Emergency Operations Center became the nerve center. Landline phones still worked, radio still worked. The incident command system, which exists exactly for moments like this, activated. Mark Rohr, Joplin's city manager, coordinated with county, state, and federal resources. Mutual aid agreements kicked in. Fire departments from surrounding communities rolled in. Ambulances from 3 states converged. This was now a mass casualty incident, on a scale the region had never seen. But coordination is only as good as communication, and communication was shattered. Cell networks were down. GPS didn't help when the street signs were gone and the landmarks were rubble. First responders were navigating by memory, and by landmarks that no longer existed. Staging areas were set up on the outskirts of the damage zone. Triage tags, resource tracking, accountability boards, the mechanics of disaster response, done by hand, by radio, by people working 20-hour shifts because there was no one to relieve them. C.J. Huff, superintendent of Joplin schools, spent the first night accounting for every staff member, every student. Schools become shelters. Schools become rallying points. And when a tornado destroys a city, schools become the places families come, looking for each other. Franklin Tech and other surviving school buildings opened their doors. Volunteers set up cots. Donated food arrived. But the hardest part was the lists. Missing persons lists, handwritten on whiteboards. Names added, names crossed off when someone walked through the door. Names that stayed on the board longer than anyone wanted to think about. This is the part that doesn't make the news footage. The quiet moments in school cafeterias where parents wait, hoping, while volunteers with clipboards try to connect the living with the living. One teacher described a moment when a family walked in, muddy and bruised, and saw their daughter sitting in the gymnasium, wrapped in a donated blanket. No words, just the sound of footsteps, and then holding on, like the world might try to take them apart. Again. Night fell over Joplin. No streetlights, no house lights, just darkness, and the sound of chainsaws, and the flashing of emergency vehicle lights, reflecting off low clouds. The power grid was destroyed. Natural gas lines were ruptured. Water mains were broken. The infrastructure that makes a city function had been erased in a 40-minute window. Spotlights on fire trucks illuminated search zones. Rescue dogs worked through rubble. Medics treated injuries by flashlight in makeshift field hospitals. And the rain came. Cold rain, the kind that soaks through and doesn't stop. Responders worked in shifts that weren't really shifts because there weren't enough people to rotate. Muddy gloves, sore hands, the radio chatter of grid searches, calls for more body bags, but also thermoses of coffee arriving from nowhere. Volunteers showing up with work gloves and asking where to start. Churches opening kitchens. The mechanics of care, playing out in 1,000 small decisions. By dawn, the scope would be undeniable. But in the long night of May 22nd, people worked by feel and by hope, and by the stubborn belief that one more person might be pulled alive from the wreckage. Morning light revealed what the darkness had hidden. Aerial footage showed a scar across Joplin, roughly a mile wide and 6 miles long. Through the heart of the city, entire neighborhoods reduced to kindling. The path was so clear from the air, it looked drawn, deliberate, like someone had taken an eraser to the map. Approximately 7,000 homes were damaged or destroyed. Businesses that had been landmarks for generations were gone. The estimated damage would eventually climb past $2 billion. But numbers don't capture it. Numbers are too clean. What the numbers don't show is the personal debris field, the photographs in trees, the children's toys in parking lots, miles away. The medical records scattered across 3 counties. The pieces of lives that don't fit on spreadsheets. Survey teams from the National Weather Service confirmed what the damage already suggested. EF5, wind speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour. The most violent rating on the enhanced Fujita scale. Only the second EF5 to hit a US city in the modern era. 158 confirmed fatalities. Some estimates include indirect deaths and reach 161. More than 1,000 injuries. The single deadliest tornado in the United States since modern record-keeping began. Joplin joined a list no city wants to be on. The National Weather Service conducted an exhaustive analysis, not just of the meteorology, but of the warning system. What worked, what didn't, what could be done better, next time. Findings were clear. The warnings were timely and accurate. The sirens sounded, but people didn't always respond. Some didn't hear the sirens indoors. Some had heard them earlier and dismissed the threat. Some simply didn't understand the urgency. This led to changes. The Weather Service began using more forceful language in extreme situations. Phrases like mass devastation and complete destruction started appearing in warnings, not to sensationalize, but to communicate reality. Because sometimes the technical language doesn't cut through. Siren fatigue became a recognized problem. Communities began implementing tiered alert systems, NOAA weather radios, wireless emergency alerts to cell phones, multiple channels, because relying on one system leaves gaps. But the hardest lesson is this. No warning system is perfect. No siren can force someone to take cover. The technology is only as effective as the human response it triggers. Joplin taught emergency managers that you can do everything right and still lose people. That's not failure. That's the nature of violent tornadoes in populated areas. But it also taught that preparation saves lives, that drills matter, that having a plan, having a safe space, having multiple ways to receive alerts, these things make the difference. Joplin rebuilt, not quickly, not easily, but deliberately. St. John's Regional Medical Center, later renamed Mercy Hospital, Joplin, was reconstructed with tornado-resistant design. Safe rooms, reinforced structures, redundant systems. The new hospital stands as a monument to what Joplin learned. Joplin High School was rebuilt. The class of 2012 graduated in a new building. Not the same, never the same, but a building that exists because a community refused to let a tornado erase its future. Governor Jay Nixon coordinated state and federal response. President Barack Obama attended a memorial service on May 29th, 1 week after the tornado. He stood with the survivors. He spoke about resilience. He used the words that needed to be said. Small businesses reopened, some in temporary structures, some in new buildings. Some never reopened at all. The economic recovery took years. The emotional recovery is still ongoing. But Joplin is still here, not unchanged, but here. That matters. There is a memorial in Joplin now. 158 names. Lives cut short. Futures erased. Families shattered. Will Norton, 18 years old, graduated that afternoon, and 157 others. Parents, children, grandparents, students, workers, residents, people whose names deserve to be spoken, even if there isn't time to read them all. They are not statistics. They are not data points on a damage survey. They are people who went about their Sunday and did not come home. If you live in tornado country, you know what you're supposed to do. Interior room, lowest floor, away from windows. Helmet if you have one. Mattress or heavy blanket for protection. If you're in a vehicle and a tornado is bearing down, do not try to outrun it. Seek sturdy shelter. Immediately. A ditch is better than a car. Have multiple ways to receive alerts. No AA weather radio. Phone apps. Sirens or outdoor warning devices. They won't always wake you. Know your safe place before you need it. And here's the thing Joplin taught. Ordinary Sundays can turn in an instant. The sirens might sound more than once. The sky might look strange. You might think, it won't happen here, until it does. Joplin, Missouri, May 22nd, 2011. 158 lives lost. A city transformed. A reminder that the sky holds power we can measure, but never truly control. And a testament to what humans do when the world falls apart. They dig, they lift, they hold on, they rebuild. This was Joplin, inside an EF5.